So let's talk about the 27 Club. What is it? When did it start? Who makes up the list? If you're not familiar, the 27 Club is a list of celebrities who have tragically passed away at age 27. Most of this list is comprised of musicians, but it also includes actors, athletes, and artists. Oftentimes, the cause of death is drug or alcohol abuse related, but close seconds are suicide, homicide, transportation-related incidents like plane crashes or automobile wrecks. According to Wikipedia, the stem of this phenomenon is the spike of musicians' deaths between 1969 and 1971. And at that time, the possibility of any kind of connection between their ages wasn't documented. The term actually wasn't coined until Kurt Cobain's death in 1994. There is no documented pattern of musician deaths at the age of 27. And a study conducted by the British Medical Journal in 2011 stated that fame may cause an increase in risk of death among young adults, but the risk isn't limited to the age of 27. The Huffington Post claims that this study debunked the myth of the 27 Club, but it is worth noting that this study surveyed a group including every solo artist who had a number one album in the UK between 1956 and 2007. And the study did not include any band members or anyone who derived their fame from avenues other than music. This excludes some really big names. So is the 27 Club just a myth, a relation between tragedies, falsely perceived by society to be a cultural phenomenon? I don't know. Let's take a look. So the 27 Club is repeatedly mentioned in music magazines, journals, press. Several books have been written about the subject. Howard Soane's History of the 27 Club. Gene Simmons wrote a book on it called The Legend and Mythology of the 27 Club. Michael Owen's Why Age 27 is Important. A lot of names end up on this list like Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, Jim Morrison, Robert Johnson, Brian Jones, Janis Joplin, Kristen Pfaff, who was in Courtney Love's band, Dave Alexander, Peter Ham. I briefly want to talk about the very beginning. Robert Johnson. The legend surrounding his rise to fame states that he made a deal with the devil, selling his soul for mastery of the blues guitar. The story goes that Robert knew that he was destined to become a blues musician, and one night he took his guitar to Dockery Plantation at midnight, where the devil tuned his guitar and played a few songs for him, then returned the guitar to Robert. Although the story's been duplicated in modern rock and roll and storytelling, even movies, could this be the very first appearance of the now widely accepted story of meeting the devil to sell your soul? People call him the father of modern-day rock and roll. Robert Johnson does not have a properly documented cause of death, but it's pretty widely accepted that he was poisoned, maybe jealous husband of a woman he slept with, or an old girlfriend that just couldn't let go. Or maybe the time that the devil gave him was up, and he had come to collect his soul. Either way, Johnson took days to die and was eventually buried in an unmarked grave on August 16, 1938. Brian Jones, who was the founder and original leader of the Rolling Stones, died in 1969. His cause of death was drowning. We'll talk a little more about him later. If you're familiar with the story of Kurt Cobain in any fashion, then I'm sure you know that there's a giant conspiracy surrounding the tragedy of his suicide. Mainly the theory that Courtney had some role in his death. But in a suicide note found near his body, Kurt wrote, "I have a goddess of a wife who sweats ambition and empathy." Why would he write this about a woman that supposedly had something to do with his death? Unless he didn't write it at all. Charles R. Cross, who was a biographer for Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain, wrote that people die at different ages and 27 shouldn't be taken so seriously. Charles also stated that he blames the rapid spread of the initial idea on an interview with Kurt Cobain's mother, where she said to the Daily Press, "Now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club." And according to Charles, she was actually referring to the deaths of Morrison, Hendrix, and Joplin. But according to Eric and Josh, the two authors of the book, The 27's The Greatest Myth of Rock and Roll, she was referring to Kurt's great uncle and two uncles who had also committed suicide. In Cobain's biography, Heavier Than Heaven, his sister stated that as a child, Cobain talked about wanting to join the 27 Club. Kristen Pfaff was the bass guitarist for Courtney Love's band Hole. Shortly after Kurt Cobain's death, Courtney's bandmate was found in her apartment dead after overdosing on heroin at the age of, you guessed it, 27. The buzz surrounding the 27 Club theory shortly died down for most people in the years following Kurt's death, until Amy Winehouse joined. Amy passed away in the summer of 2011. Shortly after her death, her album Back to Black became the all-time best-selling album of the 21st century in the UK. She was plagued by a drug and alcohol addiction, but it would be alcohol that would finally extinguish the young flame. Amy's doctor, Christina Romette, submitted evidence in a written statement that said, quote, "She specifically said that she did not want to die." She also stated that Amy was completely unwilling to follow the advice of doctors because she was someone who wanted to do things her own way. Amy would be found in her home in London with 2 empty bottles of vodka laying on the floor next to her body. Now I want to say something about Mac Miller. I personally was a big fan of his music, and although he died at just 26, I think he belongs somewhere in this video, as he makes mention of the 27 Club publicly throughout his career. In 2015, on his album Good AM, he says,
"To everyone who sell me drugs, don't mix it with that bullshit. I'm hoping not to join the 27 Club. Just want the coke dealer house with the velvet rug."
He does make mention of his drug use many times in his body of work, just like most other artists on this list. Now we have to remember that these aren't just celebrity personalities, musicians, and artists. These are real people with actual families who suffered the loss of their loved ones. This video isn't meant to make light of any of that. Alright, warning. This is where I start droning on about conspiracies. So I guess you could say this is kind of normal. A lot of people die at this age, famous or not. Obviously, famous people die at all ages. In fact, statistically speaking, more people die, mostly musicians, at the age of 56 rather than 27. But there's something else that makes the 27 Club special. Most of these people were idols. They weren't your average amateur rock star playing in a bar in front of 30 people. They were pop culture legends. Even if other age groups had more deaths than the 27 Club, no age group has had as many famous, iconic deaths as this one. The 27 Club had household names, people who changed the world in many ways and influenced pop culture in a revolutionary way. It certainly seems strange for most cultural icons to die at the same age, but that's not the main reason why this is important. Let's elaborate. Most popular figures who died at 27 were activists, and once you become big, everyone looks up to you. That means your ideals have the ability to become widely adapted among your fan base. Fame means power, and these people knew how the system works. There's all kinds of activism associated with the Club 27. Feminism, freedom, politics, anarchy, sexual rights, etc. Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix were both part of the hippie movement. They preached ideas like freedom, equality, and expression. Jim Morrison was basically a sex symbol. He caused riots, and he was arrested for indecent displays and outbursts, and he was often seen exposing his genitals in front of the audience and doing inappropriate acts on stage. Jimi Hendrix played music that encouraged the idea of peace and unity, and dissed the system for creating war between people. His attempts created protests and movements in great numbers. Jimi Hendrix also protested through a couple of songs played by his group, the Band of Gypsies. And the album is the only live recorded session that Hendrix ever allowed to be sold so that he could get his message out there. The song Machine Gun is an anti-war song that uses many of the same techniques used in Hendrix's rendition of Star Spangled Banner. The song features lyrics like "machine gun tearing my family apart," really displaying Jimmy's hatred for war. Kurt Cobain was a feminist as well as a gay rights activist, but he was also into strong political activism. He repeatedly slammed the right wing and preached left wing while also sparking outrage with every occasion, like cross-dressing, talking about gay rights, public displays of anarchy. He'd often do taboo things like kissing his bandmates on camera just to piss off the homophobes, in his words. So what am I trying to say? Is there a reason why most of them died under very strange circumstances, without further investigation involved in their deaths? Were they victims of a system that didn't agree with their message? This is also another reason why the 27 Club became a big deal. Suspicious deaths. Brian Jones, who I mentioned earlier, he drowned in his pool while his friends were around him. He was partying with 3 of them when all of a sudden they disappeared magically and he died in the pool all alone. Police decided it was accidental. The last witness died in 1994, and by then the case had already been closed. Jim Morrison died from a drug overdose. He was with Pamela Corson, his girlfriend at the time. They were doing drugs together. When he died, no autopsy was performed on his body. Moreover than that, his girlfriend was around him all the time, but she never suspected he might die. Even when he did overdose, she didn't do anything. She was declared innocent, and Jim was buried 3 days later without any further investigation, since they ruled his death the result of a heart attack, without even taking the circumstances into consideration. Kurt Cobain, possibly the shadiest case, found dead with a shotgun lying on his chest. Death was ruled as suicide. 3 different kinds of handwriting on his suicide note. No fingerprints on the shotgun, no fingerprints anywhere in the greenhouse where they found him dead. He managed to shoot up a large amount of heroin, actually 1.52 milligrams of heroin per liter of blood. 3 times the lethal dose of heroin for a hardcore addict. 30 times the lethal dose of heroin for a non-addict. Then he proceeded to put away all of his drug paraphernalia and pack it nicely in a box before shooting himself. All of these things put together make me believe something shady had gone on with these musicians. Was it more coincidence that they all died at the same age, or is it more than that? Was it a move specifically for stopping these people from spreading propaganda and influencing the masses? I don't know.